Robert, it might be working in just a second. So we can see. Do you see the live stream going?
Yes.
Great. Okay, perfect. A little bit of troubleshooting there. Let me share screen and we can get started in just a minute. Hey, good morning, everybody. Sorry about the slight delay there, but welcome to City of Charleston's third annual Open Data Day event, Your City, Your Data. Today we'll be showcasing the power of open data in shaping our city. And Robert, our GIS director, will give us a larger overview, but just for those who are not as familiar, open data is data that is available for all to access and download in full. And for this year's event, we wanted to highlight that whenever possible, the public has a right to the data we collect from them and to celebrate the ways that not only city staff, but also local partners and community members are creatively and effectively using this open data to increase efficiency, empowerment, engagement, and transparency. Just a little housekeeping for those, we'll have multiple ways that people can join. So we will have folks in the Zoom webinar and on the YouTube live stream as well. For those joining virtually, you can actively engage through the Zoom, and I've provided QR codes here. If anyone is on the YouTube and hoping to be able to use the Q&A or closed caption functions, you will have to join through the Zoom attendee. And throughout the event, feel free to ask us questions using the Q&A feature. I'll be monitoring that as well as the chat throughout the event. And additionally, all of our sessions will be live streamed on the YouTube, so you can feel free to watch from there as well at your leisure, and they will be up there as well after the event. We will have a 1 hour break for lunch where we'll pause the live stream and then restart it just around 1 o'clock. And we will have 2 short breaks throughout the event as well, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And very excited about today's schedule. We have topics from city staff across the board, as well as our partners at the South Carolina Aquarium, and also an open data challenge presentation from Emma Paz today. We have group panels that tackle similar themes together. So the morning will focus primarily on innovative ways that Charleston is living with water, raising awareness and building tools to analyze flooding while empowering communities with information. And then in the afternoon, we will have presentations that focus on resident services, public safety, as well as equity and education, closing with the incredibly detailed research into the 1931 Charleston City Plan and Morris Mills Report. Just to quote the research team here, did I lose you or are we all set? Come back. Okay. To quote the research team here, we hope that this look into the past will help to guide critical reflection of where we are today and instill a commitment to a more inclusive and equitable future for our city. So thank you all for joining us. We are very excited to kick off, and let's dive in and discover how open data can benefit our community. To start, I'm going to pass it along to Robert Hoff, our GIS director at the City of Charleston, who will present an open data overview to get us started. Thank you, Robert, and I will stop sharing and pass it over to you.
Thank you, Shannon, and good morning, everybody. Let me share my screen and start my PowerPoint. So I'm going to kick us off and just give an overview of what open data is, why it's important. That this day of presentations, it's a mix. Some of it is just raw open data and what the city's publishing and what you can do with it. But then some of the presentations are more of just what we're doing with data, some interesting data products. So this first little overview is more about the raw open data and the city's open data program. Oops. Let me try this again. Okay, can we see my screen now?
Yep.
All right. Sorry, guys. Uh, so yeah, I'm going to go over just our open data program, what open data is, why it's important. Uh, in previous years, Tracy McKee would do this part, and she is retired from the city, so I'm picking up the baton. And I actually had to do a little bit of research on, why is this important? Why do we do this? So this is what I learned. So what is open data? It's data collected and maintained by the government that's made freely available to the public in easy to access and usable format. Um, even though most data the government has is accessible through Freedom of Information requests, that's really not easy to access, or often it's not usable. The format that we're given is maybe paper documents, or a format that's just not easy to use. So open data needs to be easy to use and easy to get. So what's the purpose of putting all this data out there? Well, there's several important reasons. The first one, well, it's our data that, and I mean our, it's not the government's data, it's all of our data. And the data is an asset and should be shared. So by sharing this data to the public, we get some good things out of it. One is transparency, that everybody can see, what is your government doing and how are they doing it? You can look at the raw data. And then it opens up some accountability, that once you can see what the government's doing and how they're doing it, you might find places where something's not as equitable as it could be. So it makes government accountable. The next is civic engagement, that the more the citizens about the inner workings of their government, the more they can be engaged. Next, and is an important one, and one of the strong reasons why a lot of the GIS data is on the internet is academic research. That every year there's a whole new round of grants, a whole new round of research students, research projects, and they need data to do their work. So giving them easy access where they can just get it without having to, find contacts and email and go through Freedom of Information, that we let them just easily get the data so they can do their projects that potentially could benefit the city. And then economic development, that all of our data is out there to be used for whatever purpose they want to use it with. And, if you wanted to make a commercial product that could benefit everybody, the data is there for you to do that. And then improve public service, that kind of goes back to accountability, that maybe we can, or the public or researchers can find, places where they think the city can improve, and we can get better. So how do we do this effectively? Number one, we need to have clear, sustainable goals and objectives. What is our open data program and how are we going to do it? Well, the city in 2001 adopted a open data policy that lays out a framework for how we're going to publish our data. That we've got a whole system of open data coordinators throughout the city where we did an inventory and have a process for trying to get this data into our open data portal. Next important feature is the data needs to be accurate and up to date. A lot of the data that the city produces is quickly out of date, that you want up-to-date data. So as part of our open data portal, we've got an automated process that updates all of the published data sets weekly. Is the data accessible and usable? That we would hope to have a user-friendly interface that's has standardized machine readable formats. And open data portal, user friendly, that it's not terrible, but it is pretty easy to find data, and it definitely has all these standardized machine readable formats. You can get a CSV, which can be used in Excel. KML, so you can do Google Maps, and then shapefiles and GeoJSON are both open source GIS formats that can be used in any kind of GIS software. And then a next part of an effective open data program is engagement and training with citizens. And so we've got Open Data Day, and then we've got an opportunity for the public to provide feedback directly through the portal with a form you can fill out to request data to be published. And I actually got one yesterday that they wanted short-term rental permits, and yeah, there's no reason that that can't be in the open data portal. So I'm going to work to get more of our permitting data published. And then training that we do have a handful of documents that work through how to get the data, and even some tutorials on what you can do with it, how to build simple apps and things like that. Then we want to report on what data is out there and is it being used. And part of our open data policy is we produce an annual report, which is due, I think, by the end of May. So we recently created one for 2024, and then we have a weekly process that inventories all of the published open data and creates a table that has the view count. So we have open data about our open data. And then this is from the report, kind of shows where we're at and our goal. That our goal is to get to 85% of all the documents that we want to publish published. And to be honest, we didn't make a whole lot of progress last year, and there's some reasons for that. That it's not easy to get the data in a place and in a process, have a process in place to automatically publish it to the open data portal. That you have to set up scripting and things of that nature that is time consuming, and it's just that's the reason. It's really that, yeah, we've got data, we want to get in the open data portal. It's doing the work to set up the automated process. That's usually the bottleneck. So we're going to hope to get a few more data sets published before the next open data report next May. So that ends kind of the overview of general overview of open data, and I'm going to transition, see how much time I have, and talk a little bit more about open data in the city GIS. That I'm the GIS division director for the city, so that I can speak to kind of what GIS is doing with open data, and then I'm going to give a quick demo of our open data portal. So how can you access data from the city outside of just the open data portal? The GIS is a great way to do it. That we produce lots of apps, dashboards that use all the data and present it in a way that's digestible, instead of just giving you the raw data. So we strive to give easy access to data through maps. Still do a few paper maps, web apps, dashboards, story maps, which are websites that walk you through data and kind of tell a story about the data. And then, of course, the open data portal. So what data do we have? GIS, of all the mountains of information we have in GIS, that GIS isn't actually the source of much of it. That what we do produce is very important, but that a lot of the data we get from outside systems. So data that we do produce is the street center lines and addresses, which is used for 911, and that it's the foundation for a lot of the work that we do. We maintain the zoning layer, the city limits layer, various other zoning layers, and just a few other data sets that we actively, create the data in GIS. A lot of the other data that we have in GIS, we get from outside systems where we collect the data from them and then turn it into GIS data. We get data from the police, fire, big ones are permitting system, work order system, and various other external outside of GIS databases where we have processes that get data from them and then we turn it into GIS data. And then there's third-party data that a big one is the parcels that we get from the county, that the counties maintain the parcel records and the tax records. So we get data from them every Saturday. We get NOAA data, FEMA data, National Weather Service data, and census data. And a lot of this data we get in automated ways, that we've got processes that just pull that data from the internet. So we've got fresh GIS data internally to work with. And how do we do that? So this kind of shows the process of how we get some of this data into the city GIS. There's all these external servers that we have automated processes using most of our processes use a scripting language called Python that is really good at data wrangling. So it lets you pull data from the internet, and then which is the extract part of what we're looking at here. It's called ETL processes, is this whole process. The first part's extract, and that's getting the data either from another database or maybe querying it from the internet. Next step is transforming it into the format we need it to be in. A lot of times we can download a data set, but it's not in a format that is ready to use in GIS. So we've got this transform step, which might be adding a point for an address, or getting rid of fields, adding fields, those kind of things. And then the load process is where you load it into the city GIS. So how can you access data? We've got dozens of apps that you can get to from the city GIS website. That easiest way to get there is to Google City of Charleston GIS. Make sure you put city, that you can sometimes end up at the county, that I think the county and us both field calls for each other. So make sure you're on the city website, and yeah, there's dozens of apps you can explore. Kind of the foundation is MapNet, that it's where you can click a property or an address and get basic information. It gives you links to the tax records, your garbage collection day, trash collection day, your elected officials, links to your plat, and your elevation certificate if the city has one on file. Dashboards, these are, it's a tool to summarize data and kind of present the data in a way that highlights patterns or things like that. An example here is our affordable housing dashboard. So it's a dashboard that highlights the challenges the cities face with generating enough affordable housing for the need. And then a story map is it's a website that it's made to easily interact with GIS apps and dashboards. But if they scroll and walk you through the data, and the example here is our tree canopy story map that Casey Conrad in the GIS division put together, that walks through some really interesting analysis that he has done on the city's tree canopy. And then that brings us to the actual open data portal, which I will give you a quick demo of. See how much time I have.
You're all good on time.
Okay. So let's see here. So easiest way to get to our open data portal is to Google it. Just City of Charleston open data, and we should be the first link. And that brings you to the front page of our open data portal. First thing I will point out is there's this box here to make a request or report something wrong. That's important to do if you're coming here and finding something, an issue with the data, that definitely let us know because we can fix it. And if there's data that's missing, you can request it. That might be enough to get some of these datas published. You know, if we know that there's somebody actively looking for it, we'll try to get it out there. And as I said, it's important to note that the parcel data is county data, and they're not quite as open with the parcel data as we are with some of our data sets, and they've got reasons for that. So that we cannot directly share the parcel data, you have to go to the counties to request it. Now scroll down, and that gets to where you can find data. So you can browse, or we've got these different categories that you can look through. Let's go to this first category here, which is kind of a general category, and look for our addresses. And so this is an example of a GIS data set. This is all the addresses in the city. And even without going outside of an open data portal, you can do some interesting things. You can filter the data. An interesting column in the address data is this address use column. So just right from here, we can click a button, and those are all the multifamily residential units in the city. Or we can do non-residential, which these would be businesses. So I don't know, just examples of what you can just quickly and easily do with the data. And then of course, most people that would come here is probably going to want to download the data. And there's the download button where you can get CSV, which is Excel, KML can be used in Google products, and then shapefile and GeoJSON can be used in GIS software or web apps that they're kind of your raw GIS formats. Important to note that you can go to the full details. Some of the data sets have a fair amount of metadata that it explains what the fields mean. So it's kind of important to go there. How do I go back? And then it's kind of hard to find this button, but down here at the bottom, there's this, I want to do this with the data. And right from there, you can create a simple map, add other data sets. And this, you can do a lot of this without having an ArcGIS Online account, that you can search the internet for other open data and add it to a map, and do whatever you would like to do. Then you can also, if you had an ArcGIS Online account, it could direct, dump this right into a story map. This is kind of neat, but these are the API endpoints that if you wanted to use this data in a web app, you can do it directly from here. You don't need to download the data and publish your own GIS web services. You can just use these links right here and build our data into your apps directly. Yeah, it's the raw endpoint. View the metadata. So that's kind of a general overview of our open data portal. Let me go back. A good way to look for data is just to browse. And you'll discover what's there. But there's also under the this central data section is that open data inventory where you can just get everything in one big list and scroll through it and look. And yeah, also I think later there's going to be a presentation about some of our police data, but they have their own open data portal that is linked to from ours. But you can come here to see all of the police data that they've been publishing their data for quite some time now, and it's a lot of data, and it's interesting. You can see all the crimes, all the field contacts. Every time an officer interacts with somebody, they fill out a field contact card, and you can see all that data and download it. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. Are we ahead of schedule, Shannon?
We are slightly ahead of schedule. So maybe what we can do, and I'll leave this up to Dr. McDonald, who will be presenting next. She's the Director of Conservation of the South Carolina Aquarium. So we can either take a 15-minute quick coffee break, come right back and jump into it, or we can keep rolling along.
Well, since we got 15 minutes, I can fill up just a little bit of time.
Go for it, Robert.
Yeah, let's look at public facing MapNet. That this is on the main city GIS website, and this is our main public facing general information web app. Just give you an example of how it works. We'll type in 2 George Street. And when you go to any property in the city, it automatically pulls a lot of information for you. All the blue text are links. This tax map number, which is the property identifier, you can click it and go directly to the county website and get the ownership information, tax information, information about the building, the last time it was sold, the cost that it was sold for, which is all really useful information if you're doing something like home buying, that you don't have to rely on a realtor. You can do a lot of this research on your own. If there's an ordinance related to the property, it'll be here. This is probably an annexation ordinance, but if there was something like a rezoning, that those documents will show up here. And a really nice one are these plats, that if the city has a scanned plat for the property, they'll show up here, and you can click them to open up the PDF. And these would be the same plats that are recorded with the county, that they're the official repository for surveys and plats and deeds. But maybe 10 years ago or so, the city, maybe 15, I think it goes back about 15 years, the city started scanning and cataloging plats before we send them to the county. So if it's come through the city in the last 15 years, they're here, and that it's the easiest way to get these plats, that the counties have good websites, but it's a little more challenging to find what you're looking for. It's got your zoning, and you can click the zoning link to get a description of what that zoning is. And then it's got your trash, garbage, and recycling days. And then some stuff about your elected officials, and a link to our voting map that Sandy Gagne is going to demonstrate later on the day. That's fairly new, pretty cool app that you can just click a point and get all the elected officials for that property. FEMA flood zones. It's important if you're in Charleston. And then down at the bottom are elevation certificates that these used to be kind of challenging to get. You'd have to contact our building inspections division, and then staff would have to manually go look for these documents. So now we've got a link to our document management system that if we have an elevation certificate on file, you should be able to click these document links and get direct access to it. Yeah, let's see what this one looks like. And that one failed to load, which can happen for some of these elevation certificates that it has to do with the format of the PDF. My curiosity is try another one. Yeah, so there, this one worked. So that's a time saver for the public and for city staff. That's which is a definitely a something that's advantageous about open data is it saves everybody time, saves the citizens time that they don't have to call the city. And this is used a lot, that if it goes down, I get calls from surveyors and realtors that they come here to get these elevation certificates. But most importantly to me, it saves city staff time, that the staff don't have to go find these for people that are requesting them, and that is a prime reason why all the GIS data is on the internet and open, is that it means that we don't have to field emails and calls for requests for the data. And honestly, that's why originally I think a lot of the GIS data was published, is that we wanted people to have it, but it means we don't have to deal with the requests, that you can just go do it kind of a self-serve fashion. Where are we at?
We are close to 10:05. Let me see how we opinion.
I will stop sharing. I guess I could take questions.
Yeah, do we have any questions or comments, any additional information? I know in the attendees, we have a range of folks. We've got, and thank you guys so much for attending. We've got Councilmember Shealy, we've got Madeline Abrams from Charleston County, and a range of other folks. So if anyone has a question, either clarifying question or additional comments, please feel free to jump in. And if not, what we can do is we can take a brief recess, give everyone 10 minutes, and then come back at 10:15 and jump right in.
Sounds good, Shannon.
Okay.
So thanks everybody. And yeah, in about 10 minutes or so, we're going to turn it over to Sarah McDonald with Charleston Aquarium.
Well, we did receive feedback last time about not playing Yacht Rock during the intermissions, which is what we used to do. So we will have that turned off, but we will be back at 10:15. Thanks for joining us, Dr. McDonald.
Thanks for having me.
Would you like to share a screen or would you like me to pull up your slide deck?
I'll share my screen if that's okay.
Perfect.
Let me hit share. And now I have to do just a couple of things first. Come on. There we go. And then display this. Okay, so can you see the correct PowerPoint slide?
Yes, that looks great. I also just learned something new because I could not figure out how to get this setting this morning. So that looks great.
Excellent. Well, I'm
Maybe
glad I
just
could teach you something when we're learning from y'all and your data. So all right, well, thank you for inviting me to join you. I'm really excited to talk about our partnership with the city on our Sea Rise and Blue Line projects. My name is Sarah McDonald, and I'm the Director of Conservation at the South Carolina Aquarium. And just for a little bit of background, we opened our doors in 2000. So next year, y'all are going to hear a lot about our 25th anniversary. So just be prepared, it's coming for sure. But even though we are, and you can see we're right on the Cooper River, we have some of the best views in the city. Even though we're in Charleston, we actually are the South Carolina Aquarium. I know a lot of people call us the Charleston Aquarium, and I'm totally not making an example of you, Robert. I was going to say this anyway, but I love that you called us that. So now I can say, actually, we're the South Carolina Aquarium, and we do exhibit animals and ecosystems throughout the entire state. So from the mountains all the way to the open ocean, we know that water connects us, and we follow that drop of water from the mountains to the sea. But we also work throughout the state outside the walls of the aquarium. So we're not just an attraction. Our conservation department was created in 2015, and we work on three really large issues that are affecting our times right now. So reducing plastic pollution. We do coordinate a lot with Katie McCain's department. We work on resilience to sea level rise, flooding as a result of climate change, and sustainable seafood, in which we encourage consumers and businesses to purchase local seafood that we define as harvested between North Carolina and Florida. We do community-based conservation. And what that means, one of the tools that we use is actually citizen science, and we have an app for that. We partnered with the Mount Desert Island Biological Laboratories, they're in Maine, to create our citizen science app. And over here on the right-hand side of the screen are 4 of our citizen science projects. But I'm going to be talking to you specifically today about our Sea Rise citizen science projects. And what citizen science does is it empowers communities to collect data to have solutions-based conversations. So I think that these photos probably look a little bit familiar to you as far as what we experience fairly frequently these days, which is flooding, whether it's sunny day flooding from king tides, or this photo right here was during the December 17th storm. And so what our Sea Rise Citizen Science Project does is it allows anybody who has a mobile device to upload photos of flooding, and as well as salt marsh die-off, tree die-off, and beach erosion. And every time you hit add observation, the Citizen Science Project automatically contacts the nearest NOAA buoy and downloads all of that associated environmental information like water temperature, air temperature, air pressure, buoy depth, all of those, and identifies which buoy it's contacting. And all of that information, that great environmental information, is associated with each record. And you can take multiple pictures of flooding. We know people tend to take a lot of pictures of flooding here. But the great thing is that this collates it into a database, and those data can be analyzed. The really interesting thing is that we're partnering with a professor at the University of South Carolina in the Artificial Intelligence Institute, and he's figured out a way to calculate water depth from photographs, so he is actually analyzing all of the data that we have in the Sea Rise Citizen Science Project to refine his flood models that can then contribute to resilience planning. So we do use the Tie-Dye app that y'all created in a number of ways. One is to identify road closures. So we know, first of all, where maybe we can go to start collecting this flooding information. But our employees use tie-dye a lot, and we try to route our employees to and from work during flooding events using tie-dye. So it's really helpful app for us. So the other thing, and the thing that we're doing that we've partnered with the city on, in conjunction with this professor at University of South Carolina, is we've created these sea rise signs. So the top part of the sign, as you can see here, is a QR code to the Citizen Science Project. The bottom part are these rulers. And we have 11 of these signs stationed throughout the city of Charleston. 6 of them have gone on top of the MUSC rulers that they've put out. This one, again, December 17th storm. This corner probably is quite familiar to you. I took this photo. I was wading in thigh deep water. That says 24 inches right there. We created these signs for a number of reasons. The first is, as y'all know, just having a sign that says flooded with a ruler at the bottom indicates that there is flooding in this area. It raises awareness to local residents that this is an area that is prone to flooding. And so beware, whether it's a king tide or storm, that you might be underwater in these areas. And the other thing is that it helps the professor that we're working with, it helps train his AI technology. So he's found that gathering or calculating water depth from photos from Android versus iPhone differs. And so one way to help standardize and help inform his AI models is to actually have a photograph of the actual water depth itself. And so this is helping to inform those flood models. So as I mentioned, we have 11 of these signs. I want to thank the city's traffic and transportation guys for installing the signs, and Parks and Rec. We have got a couple in a few of the parks as well. And so these have been really, really helpful. In fact, this professor, he and one of his grad students is writing a paper about the flooding that occurs on Haygood and Line Street based on the photographs that we've taken of these sea rise signs. So then the next project I'm going to talk about are blue line projects. And this is another, we have a memorandum of understanding with the city and for the sea rise signs, as well as these blue line projects. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the Circular Congregational Church in downtown Charleston. This is they are the original folks who created the very first blue line project here in Charleston. Each one of these lines signifies storm surge inundation. So if you recall, Hurricane Hugo was the biggest storm in our history so far, and hopefully will remain that way. The town of McClellanville experienced the maximum storm surge inundation of 16.8 feet of flooding. And so what the Circular Church decided to do is show if that we experienced that, what that 16.8 feet of flooding would look like here in Charleston, but accounting for sea level rise. So this bottom line is the 16.8 feet of flooding plus sea level rise in 2020. This projects to 2050, and this projects to 2100. So this is a really simple and inexpensive way to show the impacts of sea level rise through the lens of storm surge inundation. And so what we've decided to do is partner with the Circular Church and with the city to amplify this message, to educate residents and tourists as well about the impacts of storm surge inundation, so that hopefully residents can prepare when there are calls to evacuate and prepare your houses for the next big storm. So we've got some blue line projects that are in the works. The first is that we've partnered with the Preservation Society of Charleston. They're working on creating a blue line project. They're, as you know, are on the corner of King and Queen, and they want to do it on the Queen Street side of their building. They are actually creating their own using historic materials, and they'll be applying for their own permit with the bar to display that on the side of their building. We're working currently with the College of Charleston. We have an undergrad student in their Living Laboratories program who's been spearheading this with our resilience coordinator. They are hoping to put a blue line project on the side of 114 Wentworth Street, this building that is no longer in use. But it is a historic building, and they're going to be doing art. In fact, they've started an art contest with the College of Charleston's art department and students, and they're going to pick the best design, and that's what's going to be projected or painted on the side of this building. And then we've spoken with the folks in your design department, and they said they were definitely interested in putting a blue line project on the side of their building, but I know that they've been super busy, so that's why there's a question mark here. We're hoping we'd love to continue to partner with the city to have a blue line project on the side of this building whenever y'all are ready and you can take a breath and come up for air. So these are some of the ones right now that we have in the works. But we also are working with breweries and coffee shops to paint these blue line projects inside breweries and inside coffee shops, so inside the buildings. And these are some of the partners that we've already have already committed that we're working with. And you know, we're meeting people where they are in their third spaces. So this is a great way to also educate folks in places where they gather about the impacts of storm surge inundation. But we're also, there will be a sign associated with each one of these Blue Line project displays that will have a QR code explaining what they're looking at, and then it will take you to a link to our Sea Rise Citizen Science Project, so that we're not just educating people about the impacts of storm surge inundation, but we're also empowering people to take some action to help inform local flood models. And then finally, our last Blue Line project is really exciting. We are partnering with the Fraunhofer USA, it's a tech company, and Trident Technical College to create an augmented reality Blue Line project. And the way this would work is there would be a sign in front of a building, and you would hold up your phone to the sign and it would project the three levels, the 2020 the 2020 levels, the 2050 levels of storm surge inundation, and the 2100 levels of storm surge inundation. And we are working really closely with Robert's group to get the elevation data for all of these structures, so that we couldn't do this without that elevation data. So we very much appreciate the partnership that we have with the city. And y'all are super responsive. Whenever we ask for a building elevation, you guys give it to us super quickly, and we're really appreciative of that. And we're really excited to, we have not implemented any of these Blue Line projects yet. They're all kind of in the works. I think that Tradesman Brewing is going to be the first one, and we're hoping that it'll be later this summer that we'll have our first brew line at Tradesman Brewing. So y'all can grab a beer and learn about storm surge inundation and sea level rise. And that was a little faster than I expected, but I'm happy to answer any questions. This is my contact information. I just thought it was easier to take a picture of my business card, but I'm happy to answer any questions in any time that I have left.
That was wonderful, Dr. McDonald. Any questions? And also, it warms my heart when people mention using the tie-dye app for traveling. I used to do that when I walked around a lot. I saw Emma Paz had a comment in the chat, but if anyone else has a question or anything they would like to add, fascinating projects.
Well, if you think of something in the future, feel free to reach out to me. Shannon has my contact info. I did have it up on the screen. We're always happy to answer any questions. We do look forward to working with you in the future. I just wanted to also mention, I'm in my uniform today because we're going to Folly Beach to install 10 Sea Rise signs right now. But the only reason why Folly Beach is interested is because Charleston led the way. And so we have the same memorandum of agreement with the City of Folly Beach that we do with the City of Charleston, but it's because of that agreement that we have with the City of Charleston that we are now working with other municipalities to raise awareness about sea level rise and storm surge inundation. So I want to thank you guys for that. It's you know, you all are the leaders in this space, so we really appreciate that.
Great, and thank you for this incredible work. And yes, I will share your contact information if anyone has questions, and we really, really appreciate it, and good luck over at Folly today. So,
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.
bye. Up next, we have Evan Seisler. Evan, are you on available? Do you want to start sharing your screen and then introduce yourself and jump on in?
Can you hear me all right?
Yep, now we can hear you okay.
Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Evan Sisler. I am a graduate student at the College of Charleston in the Environmental and Sustainability Studies Master's Program, and I have worked the spring semester as a resilience intern in the Office of Resilience, Sustainability, and Emergency Management, working on their groundwater monitoring project, mostly working on pulling the data and beginning to process the data and get some initial results. So I'll start with a couple of little key points of why groundwater matters and why the city is concerned with groundwater. Groundwater tends to kind of not be the thing on the top of everyone's mind when it rains and it floods, but a couple of key points. Ground subsidence and heaving is very important. Subsidence is when the ground sinks, when groundwater levels drop, or when there's a drought. And sometimes droughts can result in extremely low groundwater levels, which actually cause deeper flooding and can cause surface buckling that damages infrastructure. Heaving is the opposite. It's when we have a lot of rain and very high groundwater levels, and it can actually raise the level of the ground, which again poses risks to infrastructure like roads and pipelines. Groundwater capillary intrusion is actually a very interesting, something I learned about that I first heard about when I started researching during this internship. And it's actually where groundwater moves upward through porous materials like wood or concrete. And it can pose serious risks to building infrastructure. And it can also cause serious problems with moisture and mold growth, but mostly it can completely deteriorate wood, or if it gets into the rebar of concrete, it can completely deteriorate the structure of concrete as well. There's some pretty obvious public health concerns with standing water, with waterborne diseases, contamination, mosquitoes, and that causes lots of hazards to pedestrians, motorists, and also infrastructure. Groundwater recharge and absorption rates are very important for monitoring flooding and understanding how flooding is going to recede. And proper recharge is crucial for preventing oversaturation of the soil, which can harm plant and animal life as well. Monitoring groundwater is also great for flooding risk assessment. Monitoring groundwater levels aid in understanding water movement, which is crucial for floodplain mapping and zoning. And kind of in the same vein, if you know where the water is moving and how long it's staying in certain areas, you can better plan infrastructure and plan maintenance to current infrastructure. So in March of 2023, there was a team from Deltaris. They installed 3 groundwater monitoring wells on the Charleston Peninsula, one in Cannon Park, one next to Colonial Lake, and one in Washington Square Park. And these groundwater monitoring wells consist of a steel casing surrounding a PVC pipe that extends down into the water table. And the groundwater sensor, or it's called a diver, is suspended from the PVC cap by a stainless steel cable, and it rests within the water table. And the divers that the city is currently using are the Van Nessen TD diver, which is designed to take both temperature and pressure readings at 1-hour intervals. And it can take samples for essentially up to 10 years without needing to change the battery or to take any data off of it. And it takes a temperature and a pressure reading, and that pressure reading can be converted depending on the atmospheric pressure of the day. When you pull the data, that can be converted into an NAVD 88 groundwater level. So in August of 2023, the team from Deltaris installed 11 additional wells. That was 2 on James Island, 1 on Johns Island, 1 in West Ashley, 1 on Daniel Island, and 6 additional wells on the peninsula, including 2 on the Neck in the Rosemont community, which were privately funded. And throughout the spring, I collected the data from all 14 wells and spent many, many hours cleaning and correcting all the data. And now we have some preliminary results to show, but this data is going to be very important to gather several years of data to really start to understand the trends. So we just have approximately a year on the older wells and 9-ish months on the newer wells, but some interesting trends in the preliminary data. Here's just a short video kind of showing some live graphs from the MUSC well and the well next to Colonial Lake. And this showcases the December 17th storm, the Christmas storms, and there was a heavy rainfall event on January 8th as well at the end. And this is also just, it's kind of a showcase of how we're still working on the best way to showcase the data and have the data easily digestible for the public. And these are just some examples of ways that data could be displayed as well. And you can see that spike on December 17th. You can see the spike at Christmas, and then that spike on January 8th. This groundwater, or this ground level is wrong in this graph, so ignore that. But here is a static graph of the Johns Island Park well during December. So you have your December 17th and then the Christmas storms here, and you can see where the groundwater level actually went above the surface level, and there was pooling on December 17th at this well, as well as pooling during the Christmas storms on this well. And I do remember exactly where this well is when I pulled the data out of it, and it is in a little bit of a low spot next to the road. But you can also see how constant the groundwater level is in the first half of the month with no rainfall, or at least no significant rainfall, and how it's not particularly affected by the tides, which is also an interesting finding so far. Here's just another little graph of the December. This was December 27th was the highest levels of the Christmas storms, and you can see 4 of the 14 wells had pooling, and another 3 or 4 of them are very close to having pooling, where the groundwater level was very close to the surface. And here's a similar range from December 10th through January 10th. And this is one of the wells on Daniel Island, a well on James Island, and then the MUSC well downtown. And none of these have pooling on these graphs, but you can also, well, that's not true. The Westchester Park one does. But you can just see how the rainfall creates a very similar trend in the groundwater table, even though these are all 3 of these wells are in completely different locations. One's on the peninsula, one's Daniel Island, and one's James Island. But the rainfall creates a very kind of uniform spike in the groundwater level, regardless of the elevation or where in the city it is. And here's kind of an example. This is Etowah Park in Daniel Island, right next to Bishop England. And you can see this is kind of a normal month, not a lot of rainfall. The water level is very constant across the board. And it also shows you that there were 9 sunny day flooding events, which are the red dots on the high tide line there. And you can see that these events did not particularly affect the groundwater level at all. So we've kind of determined so far that other than the White Point Gardens well, which you'll see in a moment, the groundwater is not tidally affected for the most part, is our initial finding. So here's another example. This is Lenovar Playground, which is on James Island. And this is the entire cycle from March to March. And you can see it has a couple little spikes and dips, but it's pretty constant. And then here is what White Point Gardens looked like. So this is where you can see this is actually the tidal influence on the groundwater, and it's all these spikes and dips, which is very indicative that the tide is affecting the groundwater level at White Point Garden. And here's a close-up of that for just the month of October, and you can see it's just from the tides going in and out, it's that constant pressure change every couple of hours. It's just going up and down, and that's tidal influence. It could also be the salt influencing the pressure. So that's one of our interesting findings. And we also, the city has enough funding to install 4 more wells. And these are not concrete locations yet, but we're suggesting to put another well in West Ashley Park to monitor Church Creek flooding, and it's kind of farther out in West Ashley. It's not close to any other wells, and all of these suggestions are also all in different soil types than any of the current wells are, which could also help us study recharge and flood. Sorry, I've watched flooding water go down. Just had a blank for a second. Another suggestion is the Haygood Fishbird intersection, kind of similar to the Haygood Line Street intersection, that very sunny day flooding almost at least once a week kind of area. And there's lots of parks around there where a well could go in, and that would also be very interesting to see if that's a tidally influenced, or I guess we know it is because of the sunny day flooding, but to see if it has that same kind of readings like White Plain Gardens does, and to monitor, especially to monitor how quickly that water can recede or how slowly that water recedes after sunny day flooding. Another gap area is kind of Riverland Terrace area around the Wapu cut, but also could even go along the Greenway somewhere. This kind of just off the peninsula area of West Ashley, James Island is kind of a gap area, and it has different soil types. It's also kind of a bluff, a taller area in Riverland Terrace, which would be an interesting study area. And then the final suggestion is the kind of Clements Ferry, Canehoy area where there's nothing past Daniel Island. So there's lots of city jurisdiction out here, and there's some higher elevations, some very different soil types where it'd be interesting to monitor the groundwater levels as well as different storm events happen. And one final suggestion that we're also looking at is the potential of introducing some groundwater divers that do take salinity measurements to see exactly how much saltwater intrusion is happening in areas like White Point Garden, where we know the tide is having an influence on the groundwater level. But that's the initial findings of this research and this project, and hopefully we'll continue to collect years of data and really be able to hash out some trends and help to start planning.
Awesome, thank you, Evan. And then we do have a question in the chat from Ian. Ian asks, at what point do the groundwater peaks correlate to measurable infrastructure dangers apart from pooling?
So that's kind of, it really depends on the state of the infrastructure when you're thinking of like pooling, especially is bad when you're thinking about like underground utility lines, especially electrical, the potential of sewer lines that might not be completely sealed, those kinds of things. But when it comes to the kind of like the capillary intrusion, that kind of thing, that's kind of, it's very hard to say. And it's one of those things that need a couple years of data to really see the peaks and then begin to cross-reference that with infrastructure to determine the potential damage. But we need more data before we can really start to get a measurable infrastructure danger, I think is the answer.
Great, thank you, Evan, and thank you, Ian, for that question. Let me see, Emma and Casey, you two are up next. We were supposed to have a 15-minute break, but since we had a break earlier, do you all want to continue through, or do you want to take another 15-minute break? I'll leave it up to Emma, who is presenting next. I wasn't sure if you invited any other attendees to join you at a certain time.
I wouldn't mind a 15-minute break.
Perfect, let's do it. I will put the screen and we will be back at 11. Or sorry, 11. Yes, 11. We will be back at 11. Thank you, guys. After
Hey
you.
guys, oh, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, I was just saying, I'll let you kick it back off.
All right, thank you. So yeah, I'm up next. I'm gonna talk a little bit about tie-dye, and the primary reason is that we're publishing a lot of the data that feeds tie-dye. So I'm gonna go over tie-dye and then unveil some of this new data that we're publishing to the open data portal. So let's see. Okay, so tie-dye. Many of you have probably already seen or heard about tie-dye. This is a presentation I put together last year. I'm gonna go through it quick.
Robert, we're not seeing your slides yet, I don't think.
Okay, well, why I have so much trouble with this? Oh, I see. There we go. Sorry, guys. So, yeah, tie-dye. Let's get into it. So what is it? It's an app that the city built. Actually, Emma Pa, one of our participants, developed this while she was working with the city. Tie-dye, it's a flood planning tool that gives you forecasted and real-time data to help you make decisions related to flooding. That I highly recommend that everybody uses this, especially if you live in Charleston. So why did we need it? This is a picture from 2017, and back then we didn't have tie-dye. That everybody was using different data sources to inform them of when it was going to flood, and that Morrison Drive was on my commute, so that I would occasionally get stuck in this, and that I'm supposed to know better. That I was getting the National Weather Service alerts. That I knew how to go to the National Weather Service's website to see their tide forecasts. But even with access to all those different websites, that I would still find myself stuck in this in the morning or on the way home. So and everybody was kind of dealing with this. Everybody was looking at different websites, and everybody wanted something better, a little easier to use to help make decisions. So this is Morrison Drive in 2017. And back then, this was before the city installed a drainage check valve, that anytime the tide went over 7 feet, the water would come out of the storm drain there and inundate the road. So on the image on the left there, all that darker orange in on Morrison Drive there, that would be that would start to flood just below 7 feet and definitely after 7 feet, which isn't good, because using a 2019 an example, that it was one of the worst years that the tide went over 7 feet 86 times, and 28 of those were during commute hours, and I guarantee you I was in every single one of them. And it's important to be able to adapt to that. That one, it causes a lot of traffic congestion, and then also that it would dump you into residential neighborhoods, and that they're dealing with flooding, and now they've got cars going through their neighborhood, creating wakes. So it's just a bad situation all around, that can be alleviated if you kind of know that it's a king tide day, and you can glance at tie-dye to see where's the tide at, and to know if Morrison Drive would be flooding at that time, and you could come down Meeting Street and avoid the whole thing. So a little history. of how the app was designed. Some of the input is that's within tie-dye came from what we learned from a city project where the city competed in a contest with other cities. That the idea was the city develops an idea and prototypes it, develops it, and then the best app would win funding to build whatever their idea was. So Charleston's idea was a mobile app called FloodCon to do some of the things that tie-dye does. And part of that process was research, prototyping, testing, and most importantly, interacting with the public and getting their input. That we learned what's important to them. We got input of what they think the app should look like. So we learned a lot. And one of the important things we learned that's been built into tie-dye a little bit is that we learned that people told us what they wanted in the app, but we kind of found that they didn't want things that they should. They didn't understand why they should want that information. And an example is they weren't interested in what the tide height was. And so we created another demo that gave some educational pop-ups that explain the tide, explain king tides, and that king tides can be planned for, that we knew when they were going to happen. And once they started to learn more about the tide and how it's directly related to the flooding, they decided that is useful information, and we do want to know that. So that's part of the reason tie-dye's got some educational features to it too, because most people, well, a lot of people, they don't understand what a king tide is, and that you can plan for them months in advance. So now to the data. This is all the data that is pulled in by tie-dye, and it's the purpose of tie-dye. It's to get all this information in one location that's fairly easily digestible. So we're getting the Weather Service data, which that they forecast the tides, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. We're getting Waze data in real time. That the important bit that we're pulling from Waze for this app is when users report flooding through their Waze app. That if we get more than 2 people reporting flooding, tie-dye will tell you that. So, and sometimes that's how we first know that something's happening in the city, that all of a sudden we'll get alerts that, hey, Waze users are reporting flooding, and take a look at the weather, and there might be a small thunderstorm cell in a part of the city where it's sunny here at 2 George. We got police data, which is our road closure data, that tie-dye will tell you if the police has mapped any roads as closed due to flooding. Tomorrow IO is our weather forecast provider, that they produce a lot of weather related information, but we use them for the future forecasts. NOAA data, that they manage the harbor tide gauge here, so we're getting real-time data off of it. tie-dye receives INWS alerts, and it's a service that you sign up for, where the National Weather Service will send text messages based on the alerts that they're sending. So tie-dye gets that, and we'll show you what those messages are. So you can get those messages without actually receiving the text messages. And then Earth Networks is our city-owned weather stations. We have 4 or 5 ones on 2 George here. That's the primary one that I look at. So how does all that work? Most of it is all pulled in by these automated processes that run every 2 minutes and pulls all this data into one place in a SQL database. And that this is some of the data that we're now publishing to the open data platform that we'll show later. But this is, yeah, it's kind of the back end of how tie-dye works. Here's a chart Emma put together that kind of just shows you it's a simple looking app, but there's a lot going into it, a lot behind it. So let's look at the different parts. The top of tie-dye is future conditions. So that's your future tides, future rain probabilities. It even projects where the wind might be coming from, which is important that it does affect the extent of flooding. And then down at the bottom is current conditions. It's getting information from those weather stations, the live data off the harbor gauge. And then down at the very bottom, the little traffic light is where you can get reports about those ways. Reports are road closures. So talk a little bit more about the future conditions that we're getting those future tide forecasts from the National Weather Service. And this is important that most people don't realize that the predicted tides that the fisherman's tide table will give you the high tide for a day, but that those tides are generated sometimes years in advance, and it's just based on the moon cycle. It doesn't take into account any of the current weather conditions. So the Weather Service, that they look at all those weather conditions and ocean conditions, and that they forecast what the tide will actually be 3 or 4 days out. So really, to monitor flooding, ignore those fisherman tables. You want to be looking at what the National Weather Service is putting out. And they're generally pretty accurate, but that forecast can and it does change. So if you see something, on that third day, that can change by the time, it gets to, by the time you get there. So if it's, especially if it's a major event, you should check tie-dye often and not just rely on what you saw a couple days ago. The little tide boxes will change colors, and we use National Weather Service's colors just to be consistent with what they're using. So yeah, if tie-dye is showing you purple, that's our major flood stage, which is 8-foot tide, and that's when the city gets pretty severely impacted by tide, and especially if there's rain that coincides with that tide. Current conditions, yeah, I get all this information. Important part here is that a lot of our worst flooding events on the peninsula are the result of rain, and the weather stations report the amount of rain that has come down that day, but then it also show you the rain rate at that time. And just through observations and experience that it's when the rate gets over a ½ inch an hour for the sustained time, like 15 minutes or longer, that's usually when we get the the peninsula is underwater for a couple hours. It's just the drainage system can't handle that much rain, and the peninsula is so flat. So if you look down and see it's raining, or if you look out the window and it's raining pretty hard, and you can look at tie-dye, and if it's coming down ½ inch or more an hour, you might want to delay your travel. If you're going to go out for lunch or something, you might want to wait. Yeah, and then it shows the current tide, and that's useful if you're really trying to time, like that Morrison Drive example. You can see, is the tide just below 7 feet? Okay, I can sneak through. But if it's over 7 feet, yeah, you'd want to take another route. And then yeah, some of these interactive features, you can click the tide boxes, And an important piece of information here is the actual time of the high tide that the Weather Service rounds to the nearest hour, which generally is, good enough for most things, but that I get complaints, the high tide time's wrong, but you can get the actual high tide time by clicking on that box, and it'll show you what how the NOAA's predicted high tide, which is based on the moon cycle. So that's going to be the peak tide if you're really want to pinpoint it. And then yeah, it gives you some more information, the reasons for the color, and then also a link to some of this education that we've built in to tie-dye. Can learn how are the tides measured. That we've got a story map that walks through that a 7-foot tide will inundate everything of ground elevation of 4 feet. So it's a 3-foot difference between how they measure the tide. And that story map will explain that. What are the king tides? That it'll explain what those are. Some information about the data, the king tide calendar, which is very useful. That I use it all the time. That to check is next week a king tide, or is this week a king tide? That sometimes I'll see a high tide and tie-dye, and I say, oh, and look at the king tide calendar and realize, oh, it's king tide week. Yeah, and it's got instructions on how to save the app to your home screen. So tie-dye isn't in the App Store, it's just a website that you can download the city's mobile app, and tie-dye is within there, so you can kind of have it as a native app, but tie-dye is just a website, and if you didn't want to have the city app on your phone, you can just bookmark it to your home screen, and it looks and behaves just like a native app. And so a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes in tie-dye and what we're doing with some of this data is there's lots of automation going on that we're monitoring the tide and every 2 minutes. So we've got some automation that will throw road closure warnings based on after the tide passes certain thresholds, that a road closure site will give you warnings. And then we've got some automated alerts and texts to city staff that if the Waze users is a good example, that it'll send me and several others within the city emergency management people, for example, emails if Waze users are reporting flooding that might alert us to something that's going on that we weren't aware of. And then it also will send emails to city staff if the tide is over certain thresholds in the next few days. So you get an email that there's a predicted 7.8 tide in 2 days. So you don't have to look at tie-dye. It'll you can be alerted. And then it'll also give real-time alerts as the tide passes thresholds. And we're working to offer this to the public that we want to. It's just the logistics of how do you do that. One, it costs money to send text messages. And then there's the whole the infrastructure of allowing people to register or sign up. So we're looking at different platforms and ways to do that. So maybe next year we can unveil how we're doing that. Here's tie-dye in action. So tie-dye's gone purple. That's not good. This is actual screenshots out of tie-dye when we had a series of over 8-foot tides. And this is also a good example of I don't think we got that 8-7 tide. I think the Weather Service brought that down by the time we got there. So I think most of these king tides were around the 8-foot level, which, as you can see from this picture, is pretty impactful to especially places like the Charleston Village neighborhood. Yeah, tie-dye will show you how many roads are closed, the number of waves alerts, if there are any, the National Weather Service alerts. And newly added, but not in this presentation, is it'll also show you city alerts that we can put special messages on our road closure website, and those messages will be available in here. So if the city wants you to know about something, like maybe a message that says, please don't come downtown, we're having a real flooding issue today, and we'll ask people to avoid downtown for a few hours, and a message like that would show up here. And then yeah, similar to the wonderful app that the aquarium has, is you can also take pictures of flooding and submit it through Tide-Eye. It's does a lot of the same things. It attaches the current tide and the weather conditions of when the picture was taken. And just like the data collected by the South Carolina aquarium, the information is very useful. So please, everybody that's listening, collect data for us. It's citizen science. And we've learned a lot from these pictures that, you know, we get reports of road closures, but we don't really know what that looks like. What does that mean? What's the impact? So we've got pictures that really helps us understand and become more educated about the nature of flooding in different areas. And then also you can submit drainage issues directly to our citizen service desk, and these create internal work orders that go to the various departments that can address things like drainage issues, ditches that need to be cleaned, things like that. And it's also, you can just report flooding there as well. Here's an example of some of the pictures in the data. So we've got 400 plus pictures now, and all that data attached to it. So not sure if this, yeah, no, it does. This is, so that data corresponds with this picture. So, and it's some of the interesting data that we attach is the current tide and the nearest high tide. And you can start to piece together of how long it takes water to recede, you know, things like that, of gain insight about the picture. So now kind of to the real reason that I wanted to talk about Tide-Eye is this data that we're collecting, that we're now publishing to the open data portal, and how we work with it internally, and now hopefully everybody can work with it. So we've got road closure mapping, 2015 to present. The tide every 6 minutes, daily high-low tides, and the weather every 15 minutes, 2015 to present. So that's rain, rain rate, temperature, wind direction, all sorts of stuff. And I run out of time, so I'm going to start to go a little quicker. We've got some summaries. We look at our road closure data and attach this weather data to it, so we can do some summaries of days. We've got flooded vehicle data. We can attach all this data to, you know, why are we getting flooded data reports? Is it because the tide was real high, or was it because it was raining real hard? And you can kind of tell by looking at this is most of those are generally, we've got one 8-foot tide, but most of them are below our flood stage. So our flooded vehicles is usually related to rain. This is all the data that's being collected. It's a lot. And an example of how to use the data. So the 61 split as you come off the peninsula to get on St. Andrews Boulevard is one of our trouble spots. That the tide, when it gets over somewhere around 7 feet, it just comes into the road. And we can start to look at the data to see This is looking at when the map was mapped as closed, and we can look at what the reasons are. And here it's reversed, that it's mostly just the tide is causing this road to flood, that it's being closed with no rain. So this one can be flagged as a definitely a tidal trouble spot. And the city, this is a DOT road, and part of this project was to present them data to support them maybe doing some improvements to this road. And it is on the county's improvement list now, or potential projects that I don't think it's greenlit, but it's on the list of projects that we would like to address. Let's go through it real quick. Here's some of that elevation data, and this high resolution LiDAR data is open data that you can get a link to it from the GIS website. It's actually hosted on a NOAA website, but you can go right there and download the whole thing. And it's super high resolution, great LiDAR data. So really everything you're looking at here is free and open data. This is an example. You can see the 4-foot elevation. That means tide goes over 7 feet. That dark orange area is inundated. And then when it goes over that, the water can get to be, over a foot deep with a relatively, low tide. This is example just using that LiDAR data, kind of showing where the inundation is. So that's 7-foot tide gets that first lane. And then a 7.5-foot tide, the water comes all the way across the road and starts to fill in things. And this is where the historical data comes in handy. So we've got observations of what the road looks like. Here's a picture when the tide was 7.6 feet or so. Okay, we've got evidence that the tide impacts the road this much at that tide. Well, let's look at the historic data and see how many times has the tide passed that. And it's passed that 124 times since 2015. So this picture we're looking at has happened 124 times. And we've got in our data too of how long the tide was above that, and it's 163 hours. So that's good hard data you can use to support why maybe we need to do an improvement here. Yeah, here's a picture, a drone picture our fire department produced when tide was 7.8. And it's just another query, how many times was the tide over 7.8 feet? So this is when the water's deep enough. We got to put barricades up, close the road. It's a hazard. You can get hurt. You could drive into the ocean. You can't tell where the road is. And we can go by year of how many times that happened. And yeah, getting it fixed is important. That the police have to respond to this. That the police have other things that they can be focusing on than closing roads. Yeah, just let me go through because I had a couple things at the end. Yeah, this information supports grants that had small part in these grants that some of this data got in there. But here's our open data portal with these different data sets. It's all in a tie-dye section. So if you're interested in getting this data, it's there and ready. And just quickly, I think I am actually out of time, but some cool things you can do with the weather data. It's something that I started doing recently when we get large rain events, when we get those high rain rates, to take a look at, what's going on. So these charts are showing rain rate, which is the blue line, and then the total amount of rain, which is the orange line. So on this day, when we did have peninsula flooding, you can see that a lot of the rain came down, between 3:30 and 4:15, and that the rate got up over 2 inches an hour, which is that's if you see that for more than 5 minutes, I can tell you the peninsula is going to get some flooding issues. And then here's the day that was mentioned in the groundwater presentation, which is really cool data that hopefully we can maybe get that into open data soon, and that's a case where it's just getting the logistics of getting it formatted in a position where we can publish it. But here's that day where the focus was on this 9.5 foot tide, which is one of the, I think it was in the top 5 historical high tides for Charleston, and it kind of came out of nowhere that that NOAA had a tide forecast, but it was nowhere near that high. But that doesn't tell the whole story, that this was crippling for the peninsula, because I was down trying to take pictures of our trouble spots, and it was so bad I couldn't, you couldn't get to where you wanted to go to take pictures. It was tough to observe, but there was a lot of rain that day too, and this chart shows that we had kind of just normal rain, but then it really peaked between 10:30 and 12, and that happened to pretty much coincide with that extreme tide. So it was truly a compound flooding event. That's it for me. I was going to show the open data portal and where all that data is, but it's there and ready. Hasn't been tested too much, so if anybody is working with it and has issue with the data formats, please let me know. Sometimes when we publish data, things like the dates can be have some formatting issue. And it's just part of the way it comes out of GIS and gets uploaded, that sometimes we got little things to work through. So by all means, send me a message if you find something wrong. So I will stop sharing. And I think maybe Emma Paz is up next. And Emma used to work for the city, and she absolutely built all the back end parts of tie-dye is all her. I think I helped pick some colors here and there. And definitely and I think this is Emma's probably one of the larger contributions that that is still with us, is tie-dye is great. It's a cool app and serves a great purpose, but this idea of bringing all this weather data and tie data into SQL and attaching it to road closures is that I think I would have thought that would be too hard to try to do. I don't know that she put that together, and it's something that we do all the time now, and it's really cool data. So I'm going to turn it over to her and see what she's put together for us. It's good to see you again, Emma. And I'll stop my video.
All right. Hey, everyone. It's great to see you too, always. Let me get situated with my screens here. Somehow I've lost Zoom. Yikes. Okay, that may not matter. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, we can see it.
Yep.
Okay, all right, good deal. Well, well, Robert, that was a really cool presentation, as always, and I feel like you teed me up. I'm really glad you showed some of those charts, because I think what I'm presenting on today is conceptual, but yeah, it's kind of building on everything that you've shown, and the challenge of where do we go, especially like now, it's 2024, we're going on 10 years of data, and the fact that you're publishing that out to the web is fantastic. But I can see it presenting some challenges. So that's kind of where I'm picking up. And I'm coming at this from a very like technical perspective. So apologies to anyone who might find this boring, but I think this is necessary. And yeah, hopefully you'll take this on. I'd like to keep working on this. So now that this data is out there, this is where I think it gets good. So Emma Paz, for anyone who I don't know, thanks for tuning in. I clearly don't work with Zoom that often. Okay, hopefully my screen is clear. Yeah, so I'm a developer, still doing development things with a firm out of DC, Development Seed, and these days I'm working a lot on cataloging imagery data with NASA, and so like the scope of the data that I'm working with is just like very global in nature, which presents a lot of problems because it's a lot of data and it's a lot of data on the web. And so I think there's from a geospatial perspective, I think you can talk about how big data and complex data can get from the area, right, that you're talking about, which can be global in nature, but also, again, going back to like, you can also talk about temporal data. And as we continue to amass data that's really fine grained, right? Like 6-minute tides, 15-minute weather data historically, and so many events that we can draw on for insights and for learning and for, as everyone has said, like I will look to tie-dye and those king tides if I'm planning to come to the peninsula for like a dentist appointment or something, you know. So learning from historical data as that data continues to grow. I think the challenge therein is like, well, that's going to be a lot of data. How easy is it to work with? So as an open source shop, so not so much specializing in Esri technology, Esri data formats, but more open source stuff. It's very fitting to this open data, right? And the idea of how can we work with data that isn't tied to a particular software or tool requirements. So that's what I want to draw on. And the format that I've chosen to chat about, which is very fitting to vector data geospatially, but also tabular data, is Parquet, right? What? Yeah, so it's an Apache open source data format. And I really just want to go through why? Clearly, there have to be benefits. What is it solving? It's really solving a lot for both end users and like someone going to a website, right? Our browsers are so capable of loading a lot of information. But as that information grows, again, we're trying to rely on our browsers to interact with that information. And so if we can interact with it more quickly, then that benefits everyone. And from a development perspective, Parquet and open source formats like it are beneficial because you can write in Python. You can do a lot of, you can do AI things like what the Aquarium was talking about with their Sea-Rise project. You can do, just work with a lot of Python-based analysis libraries, but then also, again, you're always gonna need some JavaScript to create front public-facing tools, right? And it's nice to have a format that you can work with in both. And then I'll end on the concept of what I'm calling, yes, waterlogged, and I'll get there. Okay. And hopefully I can move quickly enough. So I'll pick up kind of where Robert left off. So this is an open data portal. This is what I downloaded. So this is a history flood closures with conditions. I went to download. There are a couple of, I think readily accessible and familiar formats, CSV and GeoJSON or just JSON. And so I just wanted to show a couple of things. First of all, if I go to the JSON, since I'm in the browser, this is taking a minute to load. And this is only, and my wheel's still turning. It's still loading a little bit. Nothing against the server. It's JSON. And if I collapse this, it'll tell us that there are 1,850 items, so 1,850 rows. Sure, there's a good amount of data in them, but that's actually really not that much. Okay, so that's case in point one. Let's go back here. So the CSV, I'm not going to download that live because I think that takes a minute to zip up and download. But here's some of those CSV files, and they're sitting next to these Parquet files that I've been working to convert. And the conversion is like half a second long, but you can see already that there's some benefits in the file size of the data formats. And so the historic flood closure, so that's 450 kilobytes. Some of these data sets, I mean, they're already kind of big for the web. Once you get into, 5 megabytes, you're starting to stretch things on the web. And so these CSVs are just, they're going to be more difficult to work with. So, all right, I think I've talked up why you should be interested in the rest of this talk. Don't tune me out. All right, so we tend to think about CSVs and JSON, and this is what we look at, right? But there's some serious limitations. Robert just touched on one of them. They can be difficult to work with, and it's just the nature of these formats that have been around for a while, and they're used back and forth, shared between Windows, Linux, and Mac OS environments. But under the hood, the data's stored kind of differently, right? And then there's this assumption that you're going to use software like Excel or Numbers or a web program to view them and to work with them. And so formatting issues, I showed the large file sizes and the slowness, right, in loading some data. With CSV in particular, we also can't even consider even you can capture latitude and longitude in separate columns, but you can't view that, right? You can't do much with that data. And then lastly, I didn't show this on the particular data set that I opened, but depending on the service, there's some workarounds that servers put up. Like, let me only show you 2,000 records at a time, right? So like some of the data sets by default, you're gonna have to do some work to loop through the data, or you're gonna have to download the entire data set, et cetera. And part of this is part of the inefficiencies and the large file sizes has to do with a repetitive nature. JSON in particular, right? It's really easy to read, and it's a JavaScript object notation. So every object has has the same properties, and it's very, very readable. But when you get so much repetition, row after row after row, it's bulk, right? It's bulk that we really can't, as data sizes grow, it's too inefficient to work with. So introducing Apache Parquet. So this has been around, I think, on the order of a decade. And the secret to this is that instead of, while data is written, when you submit data to anything, tie-dye, for example, you submit a flood report, you're submitting a row, right? So you're submitting a picture, tie-dye in the background is getting the weather, the tide data for that moment from the picture, where you're getting the location of where that picture is taken. And all those attributes, by attributes, I'm talking about these identifiers, right? They're saved as a row. And that makes sense when you're writing into a data file or a database, a spreadsheet, right? Because you're in that instance, right? You're in that moment and you're capturing all of the details of one event. However, when it comes to data analytics, that becomes really inefficient to have to read through all the rows when you're really just after trends, right? And especially early on, trends come in very columnar flavors, right? So you're trying to get patterns, and you're trying to isolate those by columns. And so that's the magic of Apache Parquet. There's a reference to Geo Parquet because that's That's a new flavor of it that allows you to also save for geospatial data, also in columnar format. And yeah, it's a little bit newer, but it builds on Apache Parquet. And just a little more technicalities that I'm sure no one is interested in is that it has come a long way. And we're at a point now where instead of having to write between different libraries and convert and having to do things one way in Python and another way in JavaScript, we're at a point where we can rely on newer technology like Arrow to leverage like in-memory SQL-like database-like querying of large data sets. And so that's what I'm doing. So I've downloaded some of the data that Robert has shared from data-charleston-sc, and I've been converting it into Apache Parquet. So in here you'll see we can delete these if we want to. Let's see. So I've got three particular data sets that I was working on exploring. And this is just a pandas operation to read the data into a data frame and then to convert it into GeoParquet. And so let me run the convert. So it takes no time to create those files. And now that I have them, now I can explore. And so again, and Robert spoke to this at the end of his presentation, but I think the magic of collecting all this data, right? And there's the citizen science data and the ways data that goes into the road closures that are called the flood closures, referencing to when, honing in on when the roads are closed, and then tides data and weather data at a very granular level. And so with these data sets, we can start, and then there's this new engine called DuckDB, hence WaterDuck API is what I'm what I'm naming my backend API here. Which is very fitting, right? Waterlogged, WaterDuck. Anyway, yeah. So it's a way that I can connect directly to my Parquet files, and so I can do things like let me. I can look at this data and query it, right? Like I would with a SQL database without needing a SQL database. So it really opens the door for individuals who don't have infrastructure, who don't want to manage databases, to do really cool analysis, researchers, anyone. So anyway, so yeah, if we look at the data, we can do cool things like summarize like what are the most frequently closed roads, which I think of the pictures that we've seen in the demos, I think this is fitting, right? If we go further down, we can look at, well, of those roads, right? What are the highest incident dates? Or like, I didn't say that right, but what were the road closure counts, right? On the incident dates, and let's order them. And then the idea is like, okay, what happened on 8/10/2016? Or what happened on 11/4/2020? That's not right. That hasn't happened. Okay, something to look at there. What happened? Oh, you know what? Oh, right. Okay, the months and dates are backwards. 4/11, 2024. And then the idea is, well, yeah, let's look at a specific date. I think this was, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, but I want to say this was Dharma, right? So it stands out as the event of the last decade. What happened with the tides? What did they look like? And you can study them granularly, and you can summarize them very quickly. And then I think I have just a couple more queries that I commented out just so I didn't get lost while sharing. And the first query is actually, let's do that. So every time I run this, it takes no time. Oh, I didn't save it. That's okay. So the first query is just the count. Like how many rows am I querying here? So 250,000 to produce this subsequent data table is what it is now. But it's honing in on, as Robert mentioned, oops, rain rate is one of the key factors to the peninsula flooding, right? So when was the rain rate greater than, I guess, or equal to 0.5 inches per hour? And we can run this again. It'll be very quickly. You get results from querying, from summarizing 250,000 rows of data. So the intention here is to create, again, an API of sorts. So like a website that can feed you information. This would be sitting behind a front end facing app. But you could build your logic, right, using these tables straight from open data in GeoParquet to make it very fast, very performant. And then the idea is to push it out, push it back out, maybe store it in somewhere that's super cheap, like Parquet or like S3, AWS. But the idea is to put up a front-facing site that, again, how can we learn from past events, and how can we dig into specific dates and time and put it all together, right? Study the tides, study the closures, and study the weather as the data has been collected for so long. Yeah, so with that, I'm happy to take questions. I ran through a little quickly, maybe hoping for questions, but that's it. That's all I have.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions from our audience or participants?
That was awesome, Emma. So I got a question. I don't quite understand the relationship to from the Parquet to the Python. Is that a is it a like a package for Python?
So Parquet is a format. So instead of having a .csv file, it's a standalone format, so .parquet. And the idea though is that you can work with it as if you're working with a table in a database. So it'll be, you don't have to index or anything like that. You could essentially export tables from your SQL databases into Parquet and then work with them via Python or JavaScript. There's some other libraries too, but you're a Python shop. Python makes sense. You can work with them like you would with SQL tables.
Very cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a link that I added here. I'm happy to show the presentation, but if you want to play with it, there's this platform out there. It's called Observable, and if you have a CSV, you can throw it in here. This will also not take very long, and yeah, this is very like Jupyter Notebook style. But again, the idea is to explore the data and just play with it. But as you play with it here, even though it says CSV file, I believe you're interacting with the Parquet data. And so again, it should be fast. It should feel really performant. Under the hood, one of the secrets of Parquet is that it stores, forgetting about strings and integers, which is really important, but the actual storage of it is in binary. And so this doesn't make sense to us, but that's how the data is stored, and that's the most efficient because that's computer speak. So anyway, this is a, a playground area of sorts.
Great. Thank you very much, Emma.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. Always fun. And I'll
Yeah,
keep working on this.
thanks for participating. That everybody's excited when somebody outside comes in and does something. So thank you. Who's up next, Shannon?
We have Casey up next. Let me switch the spotlight.
Well, thank you, Emma. That was incredible. I think that's light years beyond what I'm going to talk about or really understand, but very cool. And I've definitely run into some of the large data set issues, not necessarily with the flood data that I'm about to talk about, but it's certainly an issue. And geospatial data collecting over time, I mean, we're going to run out of room. So thank you. So I'm going to share my screen. If I do this, wait, I gotta do this in the right order. Okay, share, and then present. Okay, you guys seen that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so I'm going to talk about flood data as well. What I've focused on is mostly on open data. Some of it we're working to get onto open data, and it's pretty simple data that I'm looking at. But what I wanted to do was apply it to our streets. So the streets network in the city of Charleston. Well, in GIS, we think about streets a little bit differently than some people might. When you think of like Meeting Street in GIS, we're going to break that up into every individual street segment so that the attributes on each street segment, let's say the speed limit changes or the maintenance of it, is it DOT maintained or city maintained, all of those apply to a segment in between intersections. So I wanted to do that with the flood data, with things like road closures, with the vehicle rescues from the fire department, and that sort of thing, and apply that to the individual street segments. So we're seeing where on the street it's happening. We can usually predict where, but then get some counts of how many times it's happening at those particular locations. And I'm going to start with the fire department vehicle rescues. And so these came from Jillian, the fire department. I don't know if she's going to be talking about these later, but basically since 2020, the fire department has been logging when they go do a rescue during a flood event, the location. Again, we're tying that to the conditions at that time. So this is it's a bunch of points on the map, but in order to work with them with streets, I need to see what street they're happening on, specifically what street segment. So the first step is getting those points to line up with our street lines so that I can count them along the street line. And I did the same thing with the police department has vehicle tow data, and this is a little bit different. It came in just a table. I believe they collect it at the address that it occurred or where it occurred. So it was an address format, and I had to figure out what part of this, what street was or street segment was closest to that address. But I've done that here. There's some not surprising results. The King and Hugie area has the highest count for both. The points kind of align, but there's some differences. But there are some surprises, or at least I was surprised by. This is Rutledge and Shepherd with this 3 and 7 here. That's not one that was really on my radar as an area that floods. So that's when you're coming off of the crosstown onto Rutledge. Another surprise was, well, the surprise itself was the December 17th nor'easter, but I think we got 5 on Calhoun Street about to get onto the James Island connector, all from that day. So that was, a huge event. There were a lot of rescues logged that day, but I think all 5 of these were from that day. And as Robert mentioned, the elevation data is that's through NOAA, so that's open data. I think we're going to get these flood rescues on open data, so those will be available. So next, I'm going to look at road closures and the Waze flood alerts. And I'm going to talk a little more in depth about road closures, but the Waze flood alerts had some surprising results. For one, Clements Ferry Road, so not pictured on the map, it's where it comes off of 526, had the most by far. And that wasn't one I was aware of. And then this Broad Lockwood, this isn't really surprising. But as kind of a caveat to the Waze data, again, I use the same process to snap it to the actual road because it's on the road, but it might not be lined up perfectly. But different people have different, I guess, concepts of what is really flooding. So somebody might think flooding is, a smaller puddle, and some people think it's when it's really major. So the Waze data, we like to use it as kind of support. But it's we don't want to lean too heavily on it because it could be coming from anywhere. But the road closures, so that's when the police department is actually going out and closing a road. And so I've filtered those for flooding. And I went back to 2018. And the reason I think was that it becomes more robust and reliable around 2018. But the way the data looks is or the way that it's entered is it's drawn in on a web app like this. And so it's not like you're clicking on the road and selecting that road, you're drawing it in. And so what you tend to get when you have a lot of them is it almost looks like one of those spaghetti models. It's a lot of different lines that are kind of somewhat intersecting with the road, but are not directly on that path of the road. And so I wanted to devise a way to count on each of the street segments how many road closures passed through that. Another issue is that even right here, I've got Lockwood and Broad in one closure. Those are two technically separate roads. So during a flood event, nobody would take the time to, map out, okay, this part's on Lockwood. Okay, let me do another one. This part's on Broad Street. It just wouldn't make sense to do that. So what I did is I used the street intersections and the street midpoints. So anywhere there's halfway in between any intersections. And I used a near tool to calculate the distance between the two and then buffer the street midpoints to half of that difference. So you get this fun looking bubble map of all of the street intersections. And basically in order to count the road closures, any road closures that pass through that bubble will get counted. So it solves this issue of having them kind of all over the place around the street center line, and it will count what is within that bubble for each of the streets. And it's not perfect. Even in this map right here, this looks like it was supposed to be on Berry Street, and it's getting counted on this little street off of Berry. So it requires a little bit of cleanup. In certain instances, I had to manually change the size of the bubble in order to capture all of the road closures, but it really did a pretty good job overall of being able to count, on each segment, how many times has that segment been closed. And then we've talked a lot about this, the conditions when mapping the road closures. So in this case, I used these filters Robert was talking about, and I only use the high tide rain or the high tide no rain in order to not get any confusion between the two. But this map is showing the dominant cause for flooding on each of the street segments. And so as we mentioned before, this Haygood Fishburne is definitely tidally influenced. Around the Battery, like Evan was talking about, is tidally influenced. And the Lockwood Broad is tidally influenced, as is the 61 Split. But then all of these ones that are internal or more internal to the peninsula are more rainfall influence. And that makes sense logically, but it's nice to be able to see it on a map. I know some of our vehicle rescues, like Robert was saying, are mostly because of rainfall. They happen here, and then they happen around in Charleston Village, and they happen around the Crosstown area. So then the next feature I wanted to touch on is equity, and this doesn't seem to be directly related to flooding, but the point is that a flood event and damage from a flood event are going to affect different people differently, right? And historically, environmental hazards have been a kind of heavier burden on minority communities and low-income communities. So if a vehicle or home gets flooded for someone with a lower income, it's going to affect them more negatively than someone with more income. So how do we work equity data in? So again, using the street segments, we have a few of these different parameters, but one of the sort of obvious ones is documented complaints from residents. There have been a handful of meetings with residents, public meetings where they've voiced concerns about streets in their area that flood, and what we can do about it. And so I'm trying to get a better record of those. So I think what I have is not a complete record of these complaints, but we're working on adding to that. So where have residents complained about flooding? Another component is this climate and economic justice screening tool. It has what's called disadvantaged census tracts, and they use a number of factors to determine disadvantaged, but it's things like income, education, things of that nature. So these are their census tracts are quite large, and so maybe that doesn't apply to the entire census tract. Maybe it's not quite granular enough. But the good thing about them is they're useful in applying for grant funding because they're federally recognized. If you wanted to go for a grant for an improvement, having it within one of these disadvantaged census tracts would help. And then proximity to affordable housing or public transportation as kind of a proxy for equity and where we could be focusing more resources. So we use 50 yards as a buffer distance. So in this case, this is Jackson and Morrison. It meets all four of these criteria. And so that's just kind of a way to focus our attention on parts of the city that might have been neglected in the past. So how are we using this data? So the vehicle rescue data and tow data has pointed out some parts of the city that we might know flood, but they've actually had real damages there. So maybe in our next flood event, that's where we really need to make sure we're not letting cars go through an intersection. The closures and conditions, let us know if we've got what looks like it's just going to be a tide event. Maybe we don't really worry about the crosstown. We go straight to Lockwood and Broad or Haygood Fishburne. The Waze alerts and citizen complaints, we're only closing roads that we know are issues. And so if this is letting us know, hey, this is probably something that we need to look at in future flood events, we can focus attention there. And same thing with the equity data. Traditionally, if we've only been closing these roads that we know about, we're missing a big portion of roads where people could be in danger if it's really flooded. And then Robert mentioned the flood warning streets that they turn on automatically when the conditions get to a certain level. So we've been able to add some new streets to this list that we know that if conditions are such and such, that they're going to very likely flood. And then the 61 split that we were talking about earlier, it looks like going to get a flood sensor. I was just out there yesterday on site trying to determine the best place for it to keep it out of the way of traffic, but also in an area that will flood. So I think that one's coming. So hopefully this, if this flood sensor and a sign that goes with it are effective in getting people out of there without the police having to close it, that could be implemented elsewhere. So that is all I have. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you all. I think it's time for us to get to lunch.
Thank you so much, Casey. This was great, and you have a very engaging presentation style, so good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, great job, Casey. And just speaking for myself, some of the maps and data that's come out of this is it's some of the best visuals to clearly explain to somebody of where our trouble spots are, and it's all supported by the data. So it's really great stuff. Good job.
Thank you.
Great, and we will be back after the lunch break at 1:15. So I will pause the live stream and restart that just a little before 1:15, and thank you all.